I love when I meet a scientist whose passion it is to make sure that their expertise is fully communicated to people in accessible ways. And Leisbeth is really passionate about communicating and teaching and engaging people in complex conversations, especially around microbiomes and the body. And I'm really happy that we're going to be able to talk with Leisbeth about this one topic and then hopefully spread it out to many different topics. But let's look at yeast infections because that's where she's most passionate. 3 out of 4 women in the world suffer from yeast infections. That's billions of women. And there are, first of all, stages to understand this. First, to know when you have it. Second of all, to know why it happened. Third of all, how do you treat it? And fourth of all, how do you keep it from coming back systemically? So these are all questions we're going to answer with Leisbeth today and over the next couple of weeks. And I just love that we have a forum here to really bust out a conversation like this and get into it, because this is our bodies we're talking about, and we should know what's going on and why things are going on and how to become more empowered and not sort of crouch in the corner and feel like we're suffering from something that's bigger than us. So Leisbeth, I wanted to welcome you here to Swell. I'm so happy you're here and able to share your information in a way that obviously you are passionate about. I wanted to first ask you about your journey as a teacher, as a communicator of complex ideas into simple form so we can get them. Your TED Talk was an animation. I loved it. What aha moment did you have in your career where you said, okay, this is it. This is where I really want to focus on the next couple of years to help people understand yeast infections and get on top of it, get real about it, understand that they have agency. They're able to, at least understand why their body is reacting this way and what they can do about it. When was that moment for you in your career, and what are your hopes and dreams for this specialization? Because if billions of women suffer, how can we reach them and how can we give them this really important information to know how they can protect themselves and feel like they're not going to be suffering the rest of their lives? And thanks so much for being here.
Hi, Deborah. Thanks a lot for welcoming me here on Swell. It's an incredible platform. I'm very grateful that I can share my passion here with you today, in the hope that it might someday help women suffering from these yeast infections all over the world. So for me, it really all started during my PhD research. I performed research on a fungus called Candida albicans, and this fungus can cause infections in the human body. And it can really cause 2 types of infections. On one side, we have the systemic infections, which are really dangerous and are even lethal. But luckily, these infections don't happen that regularly. They're rather rare. And in these types of infections, the fungus, Candida albicans, can reach the bloodstream of patients. And starting from the bloodstream, it can reach the heart, kidneys, other vital organs, and in this way really harm the patient. On the other side, we have superficial infections, which are a lot less severe. They are not lethal, luckily, but they target and they affect many, many more people than these systemic infections. And we know a lot less about these superficial infections than we do about the systemic infections. And so during my PhD, I studied the systemic infections. And over the course of those 4 years, I got a lot of questions from neighbors, friends, family, all women, asking me the same question, like, oh, you do research on yeast infections, so can you help me? Because I suffer from a lot of vaginal yeast infections, and I couldn't really help them because, first of all, there is not a lot of knowledge about these infections. And second of all, there are not many therapies available for them. So if you have a single infection, you can apply some basic antifungal cream or an oral treatment. But a lot of women, even 4 to 10% of all women worldwide, suffer from recurrent infections, meaning that they have at least 4 episodes of these infections per year. And this is an enormous burden for them, both mentally and physically, obviously. And we do not really have anything to help them, which is a shame. And so after my PhD, I decided to reset my focus from systemic infections to vaginal infections and really start studying those and looking for new therapies. And now, at the moment in the lab, we are working on probiotic therapies that might help women with these recurrent infections. And the results look really promising, but of course, we still have to work a bit further and wait a bit longer for things to reach the market. And while I was performing my research, so after my PhD, my postdoctoral research, I also became more and more passionate about communication, because this topic, these vaginal yeast infections, it's a really sensitive topic. And if you talk to people, there is a taboo still resting on them. And it's a shame, because a lot of women are suffering from these types of infection, even other vaginal conditions. And they're not helped in the first place because they don't dare to communicate. They don't dare to go to their physician or gynecologist even and ask or tell them about their problems. And this is really where my passion for communication was born. And I started to inform people more and more, people in my environment, but also I try to expand my audience a bit. And at that point, I also started teaching at a school, at a university college. I teach a lot of basic science and a bit more advanced science courses, and I'm always very happy to implement my knowledge on vaginal infections, on mycology in my courses. So this is a bit how my journey started, and how I ended up in female-specific research on one side and communication and teaching on the other side. And I'm absolutely loving the combination of both. So being able to explain what I love most, so science and female health, to those that are going to make out our future, it's incredibly fulfilling for me.
Leisbeth, thank you so much for this. And I'm so excited that you're in the world, really, because the combination of knowledge and the ability to communicate it and have enthusiasm about that, some people shrink away, but you are moving towards it, and we need that. I have a question about the gap between, I'm going to call it Western medicine, and some of the more nuanced treatments that are more focused on probiotic work. Because I think that an average doctor prescribes medicine for vaginal yeast infections if it's chronic. And I want to know your perspective on the medicine world versus treating things with probiotic products like BioK and things like that are things you can get in the health food store that have, thousands of probiotics, billions of probiotic material in them that help the systemic response to yeast infections versus applications with the traditional Western vaginal capsules, where people are given these medicines to use topically almost. But I do think, when I think about doctors and their prescriptive ways of handling infection, they go towards medicine itself and not something as accessible as probiotic materials that you can be ingested and perhaps can be applied. I don't know about that, but is there a big gap? And in your communication passion, do you want to reach the general medical associations to say we should stay away from using stronger medicine when we can use this very powerful treatment that's not as damaging to other aspects of the body, the liver, the kidney? What's the gap as you see it, and how do you think it can be bridged? And are we at a good time in the history of medicine where they are looking at more natural ways of handling yeast infections?
I do indeed think that probiotics are a very promising area of medicine, for sure, towards the future. At this moment, there are some probiotics available on the market, specifically for vaginal conditions. But often, not always, but often these probiotics are not researched quite well enough. So I do believe that before we start prescribing probiotics or advertising probiotics to be used against vaginal infections, we have to perform a lot more research on them to be sure that they have the desired effect and that they do not have adverse effects. And when we perform this research, I do believe that indeed we can communicate this, or we need to communicate this to physicians, to gynecologists, and encourage them to start replacing maybe the regular medicine, or the Western medicine, as you call it, by these new probiotics. But I'm convinced that we need more research first, because as we see in the lab, very small genetic differences between bacteria or between yeasts, probiotics, can have a huge effect on the infection. So whereas one bacterium or one yeast cell with one genetic composition might have a very beneficial effect on the fungus, another bacterium which has more than 99%, which shares more than 99% of its genetic composition with this previous bacterium, might not have any effect at all. On the contrary, it might even promote the fungal growth. So we need to be very careful, and we do need to perform a lot more research before we can just prescribe probiotics. And I do think we need to be more careful and more critical before we put something on the market. And this is exactly what we're doing. But that being said, I do believe in the potential of probiotics, and I think its potential is great, because you cannot only give it to people and in a curative way, so to treat the infection, you can also give it prophylactically, so to prevent the infection. I think especially in the case of these recurrent infections, this is very powerful. For women that just have a single infection once in their life, or a couple of infections episodes in their lives, the current treatments work quite well. So we have creams, we have oral treatment, we have capsules. And if you take them properly as prescribed, most of the time the fungus is cleared and the infection is resolved, right? So this is what we want. But on the other side, we have those women, those 10% women with the recurrent infections that suffer from very regular episodes that are not really helped with these typical regular medicine, because we see that if you treat a woman with azoles, let's say, with typical topical treatment or oral treatment, initially the infection is resolved, but after a while it just comes back. So this medicine, this therapy is not adequate for specifically for those women. And I believe particularly in this area that probiotics will be very beneficial, because they can alter the microbiome and thereby prevent the onset of infections. So yeah, I do believe, I'm a firm believer of probiotics, but I do think we need more evidence first, and we cannot just advertise anything of which we do not know exactly how or to which extent it works.
Leisbeth, thank you for that. And I really do think that research, when it's done, has to impact, what we understand to be safe and not safe. So I always wonder, like, the general public, when do we actually get to hear this research? At what point is it accessible to us, as opposed to being in journals? That's always a question I've had. Maybe you can answer that, or what you think about that. But I wanted to switch gears for a little bit and ask you something I've been dying to know, and I think you might have the answer to this. I've been told that women who have C-sections, their baby does not go through the vaginal canal, and therefore does not pick up some very important microbiomes that would help their immune system in later days, even later months. So I know that there are some doulas out there that, after a child comes out through a C-section, they insert or they cover them with vaginal fluids, even though they didn't go through vaginal birth. Is there truth to this? And have you heard about this before? And does research show that this is something that should be practiced when a cesarean is performed? Thanks so much.
To answer your first question about the role that we have in science outreach and in spreading this scientific results to the broader public, I fully agree. I think at the moment research results are mostly and sometimes even uniquely distributed among peer scientists through journals that are often very hard to read, or articles that are very hard to read if you do not have the right background. So I think it's really important that as scientists, we also participate in a broader type of science communication to a broader public. And we try to do our best to spread the message in a language that is understandable for most people. It's of course a bit difficult because science and research is never a story that is black and white. So there is always a nuance to be placed in certain areas, and it can be difficult to communicate this, to communicate that sometimes there is not just one answer to a question, but it's more complex than that. So we have to be careful that we don't spread a message that we do not want to spread. And I think recently during the COVID pandemic, this became very clear, right? So we have to make sure that we communicate, but that we also communicate in a safe and a correct way. I think that's very important. In recent years, I think funding agencies, they do expect from PhD students, postdocs, and other researchers that they do communicate to a broader audience and that they take some initiative to, for instance, participate in some science outreach events. So I think there is a movement going in the right direction, but I think there is a lot of other things we can do, and I think it's really up to the scientists themselves to communicate in several ways and through different channels. To answer your second question about the vaginal delivery or the difference between vaginal delivery and a C-section, there is indeed evidence, and the evidence is quite correct, let's say, and it's quite trustworthy, that indeed so babies that were born through vaginal delivery, that they have different type of microbiome, so different types of bacteria and fungi in the gut compared to babies delivered through C-section. And it has been shown that babies delivered through C-section, they are indeed more likely to develop some autoimmune disease or potentially even diabetes or obesity. And there are quite some studies available to back this up. So you might indeed state that it would be beneficial to have these vaginal seedings, so to cover the newborn born through C-section with vaginal smear from the mother. But in general, the gynecologists and the scientists, they say it's too early to start doing this, and they do not advise to do this unless it's supervised and regulated in a kind of a clinical study. So in terms of research, I think it's generally appreciated that we need more data, as you mentioned yourself, we need strong data before we can start doing something like this, because apart from, of course, bringing or transferring good bacteria, good fungi to the baby, it is also possible to start or to transfer harmful pathogens. And of course, this is not something that we want, and we have to be careful for that. So it's very promising indeed, and I think there is definitely evidence that vaginal delivery is beneficial compared to C-sections, but to start interfering in the process and to start really seeding this vaginal fluid onto the newborn is maybe a bit too early, and we need a bit more research and a more strict regulation to do so.